Welcome back to my Spanish channel. This is lesson 4. In the previous lesson, we talked about regular verbs, and there are 3 types of them: AR, ER, and IR. We talked about the specific conjugation endings for each one of them. This time, we'll be talking about irregular verbs. So these ones, they follow the same endings, except there's one more rule. You have to memorize which ones are irregular and change them in a way. I'll get more into that in this lesson. Remember last time we talked about some other verbs, ser, estar. Those aren't irregular verbs, and those aren't irregular either. They're what we call weird verbs. They follow no regular rules whatsoever. There's a key difference. Irregular ones follow the same endings, but an extra rule. Weird verbs, they have their completely different set of rules and endings. After that, we'll be talking about useful expressions, and let's get right into this lesson. An irregular verb is basically a verb whose stem changes. And review on the stem, if we have a verb hablar, to get to the stem, we remove the last 2 letters, and that's the stem. If we have correr, we remove the last 2 letters, and that's the stem. If we have escribir, you remove the last 2 letters, and that's what we have, the stem, escribe. The stem mostly changes. I'll get back to that in a second. For irregular verbs, most of the time. And a key differentiator between irregular and non-irregular verbs, basically other verbs that aren't regular or irregular, there's another category called pronunciation verbs or orthographic verbs, and these change to maintain pronunciation. Irregular verbs aren't like that. Their stem just changes because it does. It's a rule you have to follow. But these orthographic verbs, they're changed so that they maintain pronunciation. I'll give you a quick example, but we'll get more into this when we get into the preterite, which is a lot of lessons from now. So the word buscar, that's a verb that means to find or to find out or to look for, either one of those. And in the preterite, you're supposed to have an E with an accent mark, of course, at the end. But if you pronounce this buscar and this busser, this soft C sound. We want the hard C sound. So instead of this, we have busque. And this still has the hard K sound. So that's why it's called an orthographic. It changes to maintain pronunciation. More on this when we get into the preterite. Remember I told you that the stem is changed most of the time? Well, it's not changed for the nosotros and vosotros forms. These ones are unaffected. So the nosotros and vosotros, you use the original stem. This might seem a bit confusing, but I'm going to show you some examples now. So in AR verbs, there are different categories. The first one is E to IE. And an example is cerrar. This one's not so common, but it's the first one on our list. So now we're left with CERR as our stem, but that's not our stem because it's irregular. It changes the stem. So the new stem, when it says E to IE, it means you switch the E for an IE. So instead of ser, it's cier. And I'll write down the conjugation for this. It's cierro, cierras, cierra, cerramos, cerráis, cierran. As usual, forgive my messy handwriting. This is the best I can do. But it's important to copy this down just as an example for irregular verbs. Now, a famous verb, empezar, it means to start or to begin. The stem, what is it? It's empiez. Correct. But how do we know it's empiez and not iempez? There are 2 E's, so which one do we change? Well, the rule in Spanish is that you look from right to left and you pick the first one. So right to left and pick the first one. Not left to right, right to left. That's the key difference here in Spanish. So this would become empiezo, empiezas, empieza, empezamos, empezáis, empiezan. Another famous one is pensar, to think or to plan. And the stem would be piens. So pienso, piensas, piensa, pensamos, pensáis, piensan. Just remember the nosotros and vosotros, you use the original stem. Another category is O to UE. Here, almorzar. This time I won't write down the stem. See if you can figure it out. If you got almuerz, that's correct. You take the you take the O and you replace it with the UE. Almuerz. And of course, you get rid of the ending. After that, we have encontrar. Similarly, we get rid of the ending. Encuentro. So it'll be encuentro, encuentras, etc. Recordar. You get rid of the ending. You get rid of the O and you replace it with UE. Recuerdo. Recuerdo, recuerdas, etc. All of them form a similar pattern. You just have to find out one to find out the other. Jugar. This is probably my favorite verb. And this is probably the most important one you'll see in this lesson, so I'll give you its definition. Jugar means to play. So you can say jugar al baloncesto, that means to play basketball. Jugar al tenis, that means to play tennis. So jugar has a variety of uses. But the reason it's my favorite is because it's the only verb that's U to UE. It has its own specific special category. It's not O to UE, it's U to UE. So the stem would be jueg. So I'll just conjugate it because it's so useful. It's juego, juegas, juega, jugamos, jugáis. Oh, so hard to write on here. Juegan. So you should probably copy this down too, because jugar is such an amazing verb. Anyway, ER verbs now. So again, we have similar categories, E to IE. Entender, you get rid of the ending, it's entiende. Perder, you get rid of the ending, it's pierde. Querer, oh, this is a good one because it's extremely useful, extremely popular in Spanish, and it means to want. Like, I want to play basketball. I want to eat, etc. I want a car. That's not a verb. Car is not a verb, so giving it a bit of variety. Anyway, so the stem here would be, now you get rid of the E and replace it with IE. So it'll be quier. Quiero, quieras, quiera, quieramos, quierais, quieren. Notice that this is an ER verb, so just make sure not to switch the endings. Some people get used to AR verbs, some people get used to IR verbs, some people get used to ER verbs, and just remember the stem changing verbs have the same as the regular endings. The stem is all you have to worry about. Tener. So this is also pretty famous. It means to have. And first, let me give you its stem. And then I'll tell you something peculiar about this. So E to IE, it's tien. I'll fill in the conjugation chart, but I'll start from the tu form. Tienes, tiene, tenemos, tenéis, tienen. Now, what about this one? Well, it's not tieno. It has an irregular 1s. And this is what we call a go verb. And it's not because it's really fast and it likes to go. It's because in the yo form, it's irregular. It uses the original stem and it has a go in the ending. So this one you'll probably have to memorize. It's one of those weird verbs, but technically I included it in the irregular verbs because it's stem changing. Everything else, it's stem changing. Per tener, make sure it's tengo, not tieno. O-T-U-E, devolver, devuelve. Poder, this is an interesting one. This means to be able to. Some people say to can, but that's not really a verb. It's to be able to, or you can say I can eat this, but it's mostly in the infinitive form, it's to be able to. And this one, the stem would be puede. So puedo, puedes, puede, podemos, podéis, puede. When I say it, it might be easy to confuse with the AR verbs because sounds a lot like a in Spanish. So it's not pueda, it's puede. It's easy to confuse, but with a bit of practice, pronunciation is very important in learning languages. With a bit of practice, then you would be able to master the difference. Volver, the stem would be vuelve. So now we'll be talking about not exactly irregular verbs. They're irregular in one S only. So like tener, it's irregular in one S, but tener is irregular elsewhere too. This one's only in one S. So hacer, for example. Two forms haces, hace, hacemos, hacéis, hacen. So this all is regular. You use the same exact endings, no stem changing. But for this one, it's actually hago. Yes, I know it's completely weird. It's a go verb, as you can see. But notice it's not asgo or something like this. Nope, it's not like that. It's hago. These ones you'll have to memorize. Poner is another example. You have pones, pone, ponemos, ponéis, ponen. But over here, we have pongo. So yes, it's another go verb. Saber, this one is particularly interesting because it's not a go verb. It's just irregular. Oops. The rest of it is completely regular. But the yo form, it's se. Don't ask me how you get there, but yes, it's se. This one you'll just have to memorize. It's not even a go verb. Ver, it's another similar one. Ves, ve, vemos, veis, ven. But the yo form is veo. And IR verbs. So again, we have E to IE. This one, for example, is mentir. You remove the ending, you have mient. Preferir, you remove the ending, we have prefier. And remember, since there are two E's, you go from right to left and you look at the first one. Prefier. Venir, this is also irregular in 1S. So I'll conjugate it really quickly. The stem, since it's stem changing, it'll be vien. So we have vienes, viene, venimos, venís, vienen. And for the yo form, we have, you guessed it, it's a go verb, vengo. E to I. So there's a new category. Before we only talked about E to IE and O to UE. Now we'll be talking about E to I. Pedir. You get rid of the ending, you have pid. Repetir. Repeat. Remember that because there's two E's and E sounds exactly like I. All the vowels sound the same, to be honest. Repeat. And ironically, repetir means to repeat. Seguir would become sigui. I better write that down. It's hard to pronounce. Sigui. Servir becomes sirve. Sonreír becomes sonri. This one's also an interesting one. Sonri. Notice that there's an accent on the I. This is one of those rare verbs where the accent is literally in the ending. So every single ending has an accent. And then we have the regular O to UE. When I say regular, I basically mean that it's always there. Yeah, it's so confusing. Regular, irregular. Now I can't even use that in this lesson anymore. Dormir will become duerm. And that's basically the main O to UE and IR verbs. There are also some irregular and one S only. We have oyer. Oye. Ois. Oops, sorry. This one actually becomes oyo. That's the yo form conjugation. And it's basically, instead of o, if it was regular, it would just be o. Yes, no, that's not how it works. It's oyo. And it's sort of to maintain the pronunciation. The Y instead of the I. Salir, again, it's a go verb, so it'll be salgo. Notice that for these ones, I'm only writing the yo form because everything else is regular, so it's just repetition. So some more weird verbs. I already talked about tener, but there's some interesting uses. So ir is to go. And here's the conjugation of ir. So this is one of those weird verbs you have to memorize. So there's voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, van. There are no accents anywhere, so just memorize them and you should be good to go. Ha ha ha. Okay, so one of the uses of ir is ir plus a plus infinitive. Means going to do something. So, oops. So for example, if I were gonna say voy a comer, that's basically saying I'm going to eat. That's really useful. You can also say voy a la playa. That means I'm going to the beach. So instead of saying going to the infinitive or going to the doing something, you say going to a place. And then the other verb is tener. I already talked about the conjugation, so I'm not going to show it to you. But I'm going to show you the uses. So tener means to have. But in Spanish, there are a lot of idioms to do with tener. For example, do you say I have 10 years? No. In Spanish, though, you do. You say tener blank años to say to be blank years old. And that's basically saying I have 8 years, so I'm 8 years old. Do you say I have heat to be hot? Or I have carefulness? Spanish has a lot of these idioms. So tener calor means to be hot. Tener cuidado means to be careful. Tener dolor de means to have a blank ache. So you can say headache, you can say stomach ache, etc. Tener frío means to be cold. Tener hambre means to be hungry. Tener miedo de means to be afraid of. So again, there's a blank after that. Tener prisa means to be in a hurry. Tener razón means to be right. Tener sed means to be thirsty. Tener sueño means to be sleepy. Tener suerte means to have luck. This is one of the only ones where it's not to be, it's to have luck. So you can say good luck as in have luck. Tienes suerte. And notice it's not tienes suerte, it's tiene suerte. The reason for that is because it's a command, which we'll talk about in future lessons to come. And you don't say tienes suerte to say have luck. And you can also say buena suerte, which means good luck. not just have luck. So some other useful expressions and words you would want. Acabar de. So we said ir a means to be going to. Acabar de means to have just. So you can say acabo de comer. I just ate. Dejar de, which means to stop doing something, not like to stop a car. You can say like to stop driving. Tener que means to have to do something. Tratar de means to try to do something. Like it's mostly used when you fail to do it, but you say I tried to drive a car. Volver a means to do something again. So I drove again. Volvo a manejar means I drove again. So some other expressions. ¿Cuánto tiempo hace que? And then you ask a verb. So you're asking how long did you do this verb? How long did you do it? And to answer that, you would say hace plus the length of time plus que plus the verb. So you can say, ¿Cuánto tiempo hace que manejar? How long did you drive? And hace una hora que manejar. I drove for 30 minutes. Some words that are useful, not expressions. Que is a relative pronoun. That means that, which, or who. We'll be talking about this in one of the future lessons, more about relative pronouns. So, for example, I can say the man who drove the car. Wow, I'm really into driving today, haven't I? El hombre que manejar el coche, the man who drove the car. It can also follow prepositions. So you can say that who, that which, etc. You can also use que as a conjunction. So it connects independent and dependent clause. If you're familiar with English, you would know that this is called a subordinating or dependent conjunction. So you can say basically any dependent clause, and you can start it with K. But if you were to start a dependent clause in English with because, you can't start it with K. It has to start with that. So this technically is another use of the relative pronoun, but this is specifically to connect independent and dependent clause. Another important verb, para, is a preposition. It means for, in order to. And you know how you use for in English, except for the use that asks for time or that mentions time in any way, you use para. Some important AR verbs to know. Aceptar means to accept. Apagar means to turn off. Arreglar means to arrange. Cambiar, to change. Celebrar, to celebrate. Cruzar, to cross. Dibujar, to draw. Disfrutar, to enjoy. Doblar, to turn. Explicar, to explain. Firmar, to sign. Gozar, to enjoy. Llorar, to cry. Manejar, to drive. I mentioned this before. Marcar, to mark. Necesitar, to need. Parar, to stop. Pintar, to paint. Preparar, to prepare. Repasar, to review. Terminar, to finish. Tirar, to throw. Usar, to use. And viajar, to travel. I just listed these out. It would be wise to write this down if you wanted to. These are very useful verbs, and most of them you'll see quite often. So some vocabulary. I know there's a grammar channel, but I'm going to sneak in some vocabulary here and there. So now we'll be talking about the parts of the body. Like the mouth is la boca, brazo is arm, head is cabeza, face is cara, fingers dedo. You can also say dedo del pie, literally meaning finger of the foot. Diente means tooth, estomago means stomach, frente means forehead, hombre means shoulder, la mano means hand, La muñeca means wrist. The nose is la nariz. Eye is ojo. Ear is oreja. Pelo is hair. El pie is foot. La piel is skin. La pierna is leg. And nail is la uña. So, like with the previous slide, I just listed them out. It's wise to write them. And family, some more vocabulary. So great-grandparents, that's los bisabuelos. Abuelos is grandparents. Parents is padres. Uncles is tíos. Husband is esposo. Wife is esposa. Note the definite articles, by the way. It's important to know if it's feminine or masculine. Children is los hijos. Siblings is los hermanos. Grandchildren is los nietos. Cousins is los primos. And up till here, I've mostly been talking in plurals. But you can also say the great-grandfather, the grandfather, the father, not just the parents. Or you can say the great-grandmother, the grandmother, the mother. And that would basically use a similar sort of word, but different gender article. So instead of bisabuelos for grandfather, it would be bisabuelo for grandmother. Sorry, great-grandmother, it'll be bisabuela. And similarly, for siblings, if you want to say a male sibling, you would say hermano. For female, you would say hermana. And you can do that for all of these. It's just too much words to write down. Sobrino is nephew, sobrina is niece. Suegro is father-in-law. Suegra is mother-in-law. Yerno is son-in-law. Nuera is daughter-in-law. This is one of the first ones that the male is not like the female. Cuñado is brother-in-law. Cuñada is sister-in-law. Padrastro is stepfather. Madrastra is stepmother. Yastro is stepson. Yastra is stepdaughter. Padrino is godfather. Madrina is godmother. Ahijado is godson. Ahijada is goddaughter. And that'll be it for today's Spanish lesson. And I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. Today was about irregular verbs. Next time we'll be talking about adjectives, pronouns, and adverbs. And this is the part 1. Lesson 6 would be the part 2 of this. So I'll see you next time. Bye.